Well, folks, we're moving right along here at CPAC. You sit here on Radio Row, and you have all types of great people who come one after another, and they're promoting all different types of issues. And as we've already talked about, a whole variety of issues from Obamacare to health care and to criminology and stuff like. We have our next guest now, and hold on. Here you go. Anyway, I'm not going to try to butcher your name, so I'll let you say it for me.
I go by Steve D. Steve Dogiakos, but Steve D is just fine.
Anyway, so about the death penalty, and this is conservatives' concern about the death penalty. That's the full name here?
Yep.
Okay. So this is interesting, and we've had a small conversation about this before, and, we've seen cases in recent time of people who've been in prison for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and 30 years, who they find DNA or some sort of evidence that proves that maybe they're not innocent, but they were innocent of this particular charge, and then they get released from prison. And just sitting back and thinking to your own self, what if you spent 25 years of your life in prison, and God forbid, what if you were executed?
Absolutely.
And then they find out, we had the wrong guy.
Well, unfortunately, there's been about 140 people who've been exonerated from death row. A couple of them, unfortunately, we discovered that they were innocent after they were executed. So it does happen, unfortunately.
Do you work with the Innocence Project at all?
We have some affiliation with them, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Because I know, obviously, with the DNA testing that they kind of blazed the trail with, they saved a lot of innocent people.
Absolutely,
so.
And it's not just an innocence thing for us. It's a cost thing. It costs about 8 to 10 times more than life without parole, which is what we advocate for. We advocate for life without parole instead of a death penalty. Like I said, it's 8 to 10 times more expensive. It's not a deterrent. So as a small government conservative, I look at it with a skeptical eye, saying this is another government institution that doesn't work, and we need to get rid of it.
Yeah, I would say, to me, the deterrence factor is huge, because if you could really validate in hard terms that it does prove to not be a deterrent, then I don't see a reason to use it. Even though, personally, I would love to tear the person limb to limb who caused harm to my family.
I'm from Texas. I'm Pat Monks. I'm a member and a board member of the Texas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, and I'm on the executive committee of the Republican Party of my county. A deterrent, it is no deterrent. Why do I say that? Look at the people on death row. Do you think they even considered before the crime even occurred to go to what? A neighboring state of where? Oklahoma? That's the second killing state. That has nothing to do with it. The deterrent, if it's a deterrent, it's not a deterrent to other people committing the crime at all. It's not even a consideration. In our state, we have a lot of problems. My problem in Texas is procedurally, we have a situation in which it's easy to get convicted. The problem is getting unconvicted. And we do have real people that we know that have been exonerated that have not committed the crime in the state of Texas. One of them was, you picked 25 years, that's Michael Morton. Michael Morton was incarcerated for 25 years for killing his own wife. And the actual killer was found and actually killed somebody else later on. A law was passed last session to open for open discovery. Okay, as a result of that, it's changed criminal jurisprudence in the state of Texas.
In terms of, states that are a lot stricter, obviously like Texas, so statistically, you really feel like the numbers support, the theory that you posit that it isn't a deterrent.
Well, if it was a deterrent, states like Texas, Houston, Texas, Sacramento, California would be the safest place on the planet. They execute more people in California and Texas than pretty much anywhere else on the planet. But their crime rates are still exorbitantly high, in various cities in Texas, various cities in California. Whereas in states like Illinois that just got rid of the death penalty, their crime rates, including their murder rates, are dropping.
It's definitely an interesting discussion, because there are certain people, like the Boston bombers, for instance. There are certain cases where sometimes you wonder why the police don't just shoot when they're arresting. And I know we're just saying that, and it's certainly not legal. But those are the types of cases you're like, I don't get it. Like, these guys, they'll appeal. But then you have cases where maybe evidence was mishandled slightly, and not to put down the police, but you can get cop doesn't do all of his homework or whatnot, and these things happen. Mm-hmm. And in that case, I could understand where it's a reasonable defense to say, okay, maybe I'm guilty, but to kill me is another story. What do you think of it?
Well, we found there's a case, Todd Willingham and Carlos DeLuna were executed, and it was proven that they didn't commit the crime. And Rick Perry, our governor, pulled the panel to prove that that wasn't the case. What we found is in those areas and those crimes where the death penalty is used, it's usually where you have shoddy police work. And if you look at the facts of Carlos DeLuna case, you'll see that clearly they knew who did it, but they prosecuted anyway because it was just shoddy, lazy police work.
Well, we've learned over the past year alone that our government at the highest levels, whether you're looking at Benghazi, IRS, Gate, or other things, can be completely complicitous in malfeasance.
Incompetence?
In incompetence, or I'll go right out and just call it malfeasance, call it what it is. But with that in mind, I want to point one thing out. It's very important. I am a huge fan of American sovereignty and only using international courts and things in balance with that sovereignty, always deferring to our Constitution and sovereignty first. However, we have a lot, especially when fighting things like terrorism. We have to work with our international community, friends, allies, and even people who aren't our allies, like Russia. Sometimes we have to work with in fighting terrorism. Very often you hear other countries are not cooperating with us because of the death penalty. Mm-hmm. So has that been an issue? Is it something that you've studied, and do you have a position on that? Well,
right now, one of our members in our organization in Texas is Susan Truscott. She's the vice consul for England, for Britain, for the British consul. In Houston, this is number one place for consuls. Washington, D.C., New York is second. Houston is third, okay? We're in touch with our people. We have a British citizen right now on death row. And believe you me, at all levels, these people are interested in it. I know what you're saying. There's the extradition laws and extradition somebody back to, Europe, or sending somebody from Europe back to the United States. Has to be an agreement that they won't seek the death penalty, where they'll follow an extradition treaty. But I can tell you that they're very involved at all levels of their own citizens that are on death row. So, they're advocates against the death penalty. And your question, I think, had to do with terrorism. Is that right?
Well, it's not just terrorism. It's with terrorism as a backdrop, we need significant cooperation with other countries. Mm-hmm. So if we have people who are not willing to extradite people to face the U.S. courts because we may just put them to death, then that may very well make us feel better for the few we'd like to see hung in the public courtyard. But the reality is it probably doesn't serve our greater security interests.
No, and frankly, it puts us in a field with Singapore and China as some of the only countries left that use the death penalty. I don't know how that makes you feel, but it sure doesn't make me feel very good.
Well, in terms of that, and to backtrack a little bit in terms of it not being a deterrent, could it be because of the amount of time that people on death row sit on death row? It's not like they commit the crime and bam,
Sure.
that execution is carried out. I mean, they sit there for decades at times.
Mm-hmm. Well, you compare states like Montana, where I'm from, to Texas. We've got guys who've been on there for about 30 years. Texas kind of has a fast food lane that, they shoot them through.
Average of 9. It's an average of 9 years. And you're right. What you're saying is these people serve basically a life sentence and then they're executed. So what's the point?
Right.
Yeah. But the biggest problem is we haven't even considered, we haven't even touched on it yet. 87% of these cases are remanded for retrial at some point. Nobody ever talks about the family members, victims. Those are the people that go through the real hell. Those are the ones that convince me as a Republican to be against this issue.
I want to add a little twist to our conversation here because you guys are conservatives and we're conservatives. And I always found it interesting that from a liberal standpoint, it's always been they're for abortion against the death penalty, which to me I never quite figured out. I always thought you're one way or the other. Yeah. So it's interesting. So because I think if you take the stance you're against the death penalty, meaning that you're for their life, I would assume that you guys may be also.
Yeah, I was raised Roman Catholic. I'm a pretty devout believer. I'm pro-life, 100%.
It's an interesting dynamic, but I think it's part of the discussion because
Absolutely.
In my mind, you have to value life if that's the way you're going to feel.
Spot on.
Before and after.
Yep, exactly. From conception till natural death.
Right.
And I don't think supporting death penalty is congruent with our traditional conservative values.
Now, how much breadth do you have in your organization? Is it 100% focused on death penalty, or have you focused on other issues pertaining to recidivism or things of that nature?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're exclusively focused on death penalty and replacing it with life without parole. Some of our members have been involved in other criminal justice issues. Senator Roy Brown, who helped start Conservative Concern from Montana, is involved in the Office of Public Defense. Office of Public Defender. So he's involved in other things, but our organization completely focuses on death penalty.
Now, are states' attorneys generals typically willing to listen and cooperate, or do they see this as you taking an important tool out of their arsenal?
Well, I think one statistic that we found, we'll talk about police chiefs. Police chiefs use and value the death penalty as the least most effective and useful tool in their arsenal. But they're never going to come out and say we're against the death penalty. But recently there was a former U.S. attorney of Dallas. He helped develop the ABA study on the death penalty, and it's the first time I ever heard him say that he was against the death penalty. It was a real surprise. We've had former prosecutors, former prosecutors, not active prosecutors, come out and say they're against the death penalty. But I forgot.
Now, this is actually an interesting issue because it just struck me, who's actually for the death penalty? Now, I'm not talking about individuals. I mean, believe me, I am an extremely reactive person. If somebody harmed my family, it would never go to trial.
Sure.
But the civilized person in me can see and concede most of the points you've made. But now I look to the other side. Who's the advocacy group who's actually spending time trying to ensure that the death penalty continues to be a method of deterrence in this country?
It's a great question, John. Part of it is sort of it's become the de facto position of conservatives to be for the death penalty, and I think a lot of people just haven't given it the skeptical eye that you or I have. And so they that's just their position. That's inherently where they are until they start looking at it, and we get a lot of converts.
Dudley Sharp is one guy. He's out of Houston. I've gone eye to eye with him, T to T. Last time I was interviewed with him is when we had the 500th execution in Texas. And he tried to put himself off as some conservative. I said, I've never seen you at a conservative function. I've never seen you at CPAC. I've never seen you at a Republican executive meeting. I've never seen you. I don't know who this guy is. He's self-appointed, one man, but there's no group out there.
I'm a big John Wayne fan, and I love the old Westerns. And, you watch these movies, and somebody does something wrong in the Wild West, and quick trial, and they hang him in the local town halls and life was obviously different in America, and right or wrong, I'm sure a lot more people back then were hung or whatnot for wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah.
And I think we're in a time and place where we should have the right science. The police certainly have enough funding in most places. The training should be good enough. The systems are in place. I mean, you would think that we would be able to do a better job of avoiding, maybe not some of the cases from 10, 20, 30 years ago, but in today going forward, you would think that we could handle these cases better as long as the professionals do their jobs.
Well, and you're talking about a system that ends with a perfect solution, death. It's finite. You're either dead or you're not. With people who are fallible, they can make mistakes. They can, check the wrong box or get the wrong fingerprint or whatever. So unfortunately, the system is inherently flawed. It involves people and it's broken. We've tried fixing it in Texas. They've sped it up. They've tried everything.
Well, I've been a lawyer for 30 years, and you could get one jury with the same fact situation, the same officer, the same evidence, and the same judge, the same prosecutor and defense attorney with another jury and get two different results. And this has happened. There's so many flaws, as long as it's a human issue.
Well, that's true, and if you're talking about something as final as putting somebody to death, that makes good sense. I want to bring another equation into the mix. Think about the opportunity cost right? So you brought up the point, and did you say 8 to 10 times, I believe, the cost? Okay, so look at 8 to 10x is huge, enormous, no matter what the cost is. And we know prison costs are very high, and like everything else, they're rising. So there's an opportunity cost here. Where else could we actually apply those budgets? So I know this isn't part of your bailiwick, but maybe as a consideration, if you did the analysis to say, what if we took that 8 to 10x and we applied it toward better training, better ways of reducing recidivism,
more handcuffs
or preventing the interaction between, and this is I believe a huge problem right now, the interaction between people within the prison system who are gang members using the people in their gang out of the prison to maintain their power base and to punish their enemies. If we put that money toward other causes, I would think we would get infinitely more bang for our buck.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely. That is part of our bailiwick. I agree with you 100%. And frankly, I'd rather see it go back to taxpayers. But I think you're right. I think lots of uses for that money that would, prevent the crime in the first place. We could put more cops on the street. We could put more handcuffs in their pockets. We could put more, cop cars, squad cars on the streets to help prevent crime in the first place and keep communities safer, where the death penalty just isn't doing that.
I'd even be willing to spend it on brass knuckles for all the policemen. That works.
That concept you hear a lot, restorative justice. Nobody ever talks about the family victims. What about doing something for them? Nobody does. They get so lost. In many crimes, you'll mention the killer, Carla Faye Tucker. You've heard of her? Okay, who did she kill? Deborah Thornton. Nobody knows that. And she was and that murder right there was one of the things that changed my whole opinion of the death penalty.
That's an excellent point. Just to sum this up, when you look at the cases that you guys have studied, is there any common thing in the people, whether they're guilty or not, in their backgrounds that you could look at in other people to say these are the potential people to be the next in line?
Yep, there's three big factors: where you commit your crime, the color of your skin, and the color of your victim's your victim's skin. So depending on what county you live in, there's 2% of counties that commit the most people to the death penalty. If you are not white, you are more likely to get the death penalty. And if your victim is a white female, you're more likely to get the death penalty.
It's very interesting. Do you guys have a website?
Yep, it is conservativesconcerned.com.
Conservativesconcerned.com.
.org.
.org. Okay.
Yep.
Well, guys, it was great speaking with you, and
Brett,
thank
John,
you so much
so
for
much.
your insight on this issue. Thank you for coming. Well, John, we're got a few 20 minutes left in the show today, and of course we'll be back on tomorrow, folks. We're trying to figure out the whole time here. Of course, we were supposed to be on between 2 and 4, but these things happen.
Brett, I have to say, that was actually a pretty convincing argument for me because, you and I are both cut from the same cloth, literally and figuratively. And I do have that sense that you really want to punish, violent criminals. But when you really start looking at it and you try to analyze it in a holistic and you take the emotion out of it, they make a good point. And I will say this, that part of the reason we are a nation of laws and we have a justice system and not a vigilante system is for that very reason. We are fighting a clash of civilizations against a lot of the radical Islamist thought, lopping off arms, beheading, cutting off noses of young girls who embarrass the family, et cetera. And the reality is we're fighting against and we're trying to show that we have evolved about 700 years beyond some of those other societies. And so you can clearly connect the two and make the case that maybe putting people to death, no matter how heinous their crime, is barbaric. And the most important thing is to get them out of society forever and permanently and just never turn around, never look back, Brett.